It seems like everybody's putting out 2011 style guns now, and they're all pretty samey until you spend sort of decent used car money on them. Kimber is changing that up with their 2K11, a gun that has the performance you'd want and looks that will turn heads on the range. So the Kimber 2K11 is not just another sort of and also 2011. I mean, the 2011 market is kind of where the AR market was, 10 or so years ago, where everybody started making them and they're all at different price points. And, are you getting the specification that you want on yours and the feature set? Kimber's actually moving the ball down the field in a couple ways. First and foremost is they have an external extractor. Now, for you guys who are not 2011 guys, 1911 guys, and don't do a lot of shooting with them, most 2011s have an internal extractor, and what that means is it's another maintenance point, because the internal extractors, you need to monitor the tension that's on them about every 10,000 rounds or so. You want to check that and make sure it's still good, but also you have to clean that channel because it's inside the combustion chamber, so carbon builds up in the channel and defeats sort of the extraction. You probably didn't know that, but if you take out the extractor out and run a 22 bore jag through it, you can get all kinds of lovely stuff like all this sludge that came out of one of my competition guns. Yeah, that's pretty gross, but yeah, there's lots of stuff that goes in there. That's not a problem with external extractors. They generally last longer between maintenance and servicing because, the nature of having a regular traditional spring inside the extractor versus kind of the sort of spring steel sort of tension on the extractor. It's just, in my opinion, a better design, and they put it on there. The external extractor is basically the standard on every other style of pistol. For some reason, we're still hanging out in 1911 land doing things on a 100-year-old design. But fun fact, the original 1911 design had an external extractor until the Army decided that the troops were going to monkey with it if they could get at it, so they moved it to the inside. So it's not the original Browning design to have the internal extractor. So maybe this isn't a new feature, maybe this is a very old feature. Similarly, Kimber has a new toolless guide rod. In my opinion, it's a little bit nicer of a design than the traditional push-button Dawson design, where you push in on the guide rod and you rotate it and it'll capture the reverse plug and the spring to get everything out of the slide. It's just a little bit more secure. It doesn't feel like that little lip is going to let go of the reverse plug if you touch it wrong. So I'm a fan of that design. I imagine a lot of people probably look at that for their 5-inch 1911s. And finally, something that most 2011s don't have is the aluminum grip that it comes with is actually contoured to stop the magazine from over-inserting and damaging the ejector. See that little bit in there? That's the ejector. What ends up happening is on a slide lock sort of reload, if you're inserting the magazine, if you use too much force, because 2011 magazines can often be longer than the grips, you can over-insert and bend the ejector, causing problems. So what Kimber did is they basically took the taper of the 2011 mag, and the grip sort of matches that at the internal geometry, so you cannot over-insert it. It doesn't even get close to the ejector. But that comes with a cost. So what that is this is a Checkmate style mag, and Checkmate makes most of the US 2011 style magazines that aren't MBX mags. So what that means is if you have MBX mags, they will not fit in the grip of the gun. You cannot get them to lock in. But I did try it with Atlas, Duramags, Checkmate, the ones that ship with the Kimber, which I think are also Checkmate mags. They're just not branded for it. And all those magazine tubes work fine in the gun. But if you're an MBX guy, sorry. So I like to tell you guys how the guns come to the channel. These were actually sent to me by Kimber for video. This one is on loan. And this is the base model of the gun. It has a black DLC with brush polish finish on sort of the flats there. The slide has kind of a tri-top, and it has a standard rear sight with no magwell. The only other big difference between it, it's not a big difference honestly, is the profile of the grip safety is a little bit different, but this one is in 45. So this is a 45, whereas this is the target model of the 2K11, and the biggest difference of it is that the slide has these cutouts in it. It comes with an LPA style sort of target rear sight. It's honestly a really great sight. So if you're an iron shooter, you'll be pretty happy, but it also comes with a CHPWS optic plate. Then this is the SRO RMR sort of plate. You can see that there's no rear sight on the plate there, which is fine, but as I understand it, there will be rear sight options. You can see that it puts the cowl of the SRO over the ejection port. That's kind of a good thing, bad thing. We'll get there in a bit. And the other big feature on the target that is different is this stand chin style magwell that kind of is on the grip. It's very comfortable feeling magwell. It has a nice blend to the internal of the grip, but the barrel is black DLC, whereas the barrel on the base model is this kind of coyote PVD. and then, you know, everything else is the same. The frames for the guns, which is, you know, 2011 style, so it's just kind of that bit there, is DLC coated. The grip is aluminum and hard coat anodized, type 3 anodizing for, you know, Finnish nerds out there. The magwell's also anodized, and the small parts, similarly as a kind of premium feature, are DLC coated, which is really nice. Welcome back to the channel, guys. I'm David, and I appreciate you being here. I want to say hello to the fellow dads out there. Hope you guys are crushing it, and I honor you with this. How does a duck toot? With its butt quack. Your 6-year-olds will love that, at least mine did. As I mentioned, these guns were sent in for video by Kimber, no money changed hands or anything like that. I am just a 2011 nerd and was very excited at the potential of somebody else entering the market, and not only entering the market, but doing things a little bit differently. So knocking out sort of the specs that are on the website stuff, I'm not gonna read you the dang things. You can do it yourself if you're that curious. But as I mentioned, it comes in 2 different models. I can't tell you the price because YouTube is weird about saying prices on guns now. Yes, they are demonetizing videos as promotion if you say a price in them. And it is hideously inconsistent with how that rule is applied. It's really dumb. So what the gun actually is, as I mentioned, it is a 2011 pattern pistol with an aluminum grip. It is a short rail version of the gun, as you see there. It does have a nice 3-slot Picatinny rail if you're a weapon light kind of guy. The barrel is a bull barrel, and on the 9mm gun, you can see that it is fluted and weight relieved a little bit. We'll talk about it more when we get to shooting. Don't be too upset that it's not a full heavy bull barrel. We'll get there. The gun with the optic on it weighs about 43 ounces, which is kind of a sweet spot. It makes it legal for IDPA. Stan Chin's a big IDPA shooter, so he designed the magwell to fit within the IDPA box. Meanwhile, the USPSA guys are probably going to want a giant flower pot magwell, and honestly, I haven't pulled magwells off my other guns to see what will fit on this grip. From a control perspective, the trigger is an aluminum trigger shoe that is also anodized to match the magwell, and it looks like a luchador mask, which I really appreciate about it. The safeties, as you can see, are ambi, and they are sort of a carry melt profile of safety, so kind of thin, not super wide. The mag release button is not drilled and tapped, so if you're somebody who likes obnoxiously large mag buttons, you're going to be on your own there. And the aluminum grip texture is actually really cool. It's kind of on the upper end of what I'd call a medium texture. It's very shootable, but it's not like super gonna tear you up if you decide you want to carry the thing. I don't know how you guys carry 40-ounce guns. Maybe I'm just getting old. But the grip texture is something that if you did put it against your smooth, supple daddy tummy, it wouldn't tear you up too bad. It's not cheese gratery, but it does stay put when you put some pressure on it when you're shooting. The grip is relieved under the trigger guard with a beautiful cutout, and that's to get onto the mag release. I have XL size hands, and I still have to shift the gun in my grip to reach the mag release. So if that's you, you're gonna be doing it as well. The guns will come in a bag, and they have 3 magazines. With the 9mm, it is a 17 rounder, then 2 20 rounders if they're legal in your state. And then as far as the 45 is concerned, it came with 3 13-round magazines. Now, more on that in a bit. That's kind of a negative. Looks like you should be able to fit more rounds. You think you can, you can't. With how the gun is positioned on price, the fact that it does come with an aluminum grip is a premium feature. An aluminum grip is a $400 to $600 upgrade depending on who you're getting the grip from for a 2011. So while this gun with the coyote finish is kind of staccato P money, it comes with that aluminum grip, which is something you don't get on the P. It comes with an aluminum trigger, which is also something you don't get on the P. And it comes with the optic plate, which again is something you don't get with the P out of the box. Now I have a bunch of guns I want to compare this to, so you guys who are familiar with 2011s, hopefully you can use one of these models as a benchmark, but let's talk about how it shoots first. Now, the balance on the gun is super neutral. It's kind of just over the front part of the trigger guard. It wants to dip down a little bit, but not very much. It kind of balances beautifully. Whereas my Masterpiece Arms that has a heavy bull barrel and a nearly full-length dust cover, it kind of wants to dip down. It's nearly, I'd say, 3/4 of the way up the rail. And the Prodigy is right at the end of the gun. It is very sort of nose heavy. The thing that I personally really like about guns that are balanced more over the trigger guard is they feel like they swing more precisely. You're not fighting the momentum at the end of the muzzle when you swing from target to target. And when you're staying on the same target, the muzzle heavy ones just feel like they want to kind of dive a little bit more than the more balanced guns, which kind of stay over there. So what I ended up finding shooting this back to back with my Masterpiece Arms DS9 is that this gun behind the trigger when you're shooting at speed feels pretty much identical, so it's not really losing anything due to that weight relieved barrel on the 9mm model. The 45, I shot it side by side with another bull barrel 1911, just thinking like, well, how does this shoot against, you know, a regular single stack? And I'm happy to report that the kind of broader aluminum grip really spread the force out in my palm and just felt way more comfortable to shoot with the 45. Accuracy with both guns is exactly what you would expect for a gun at this price point. I was getting great groups from pretty much everything I put through the gun. So comparing the 45 to that 1911, I think that tells you kind of what you need to know about the gun. It is nicer shooting than a 1911 in my opinion, and at the same time it holds more rounds, so it's difficult to not really appreciate what this gun is doing. Swapping over to the target model in 9mm, because I have way more experience with 9mm 2011s, because let's face it, most 2011s are 9mm. What I found is that this keeps up with anything, you know, with, you know, $1,000 or more premium over it. It just felt really great shooting it. I really do like the aluminum grip module that comes on the gun. There is a downside talking about inserting mags on it. We'll get there in the negatives, but honestly not that big a deal. The optic system does sort of sink down the optic a little bit. I mean, it's decent for 2011s. 2011s don't get the dots super deep, but this gets them, you know, reasonably deep, which is a feature that I like. I like the lower height over bore. The controls are exactly as you'd imagine them to be. They're very functional, you know, depending on which hand you're using. The snick of the safeties is super positive, feels really premium as well. And the trigger, I'm not going to tell you what it is because again, YouTube guidelines are really weird, but you're a really smart guy, and if you focus really hard, you'll figure it out. So the trigger is of great quality. You can see that the trigger pull, there's almost, you know, a little bit of wiggle to get to the wall there, and then you pull through the wall, very clean release, and just a tiny little bit of over travel. As you guys who are well versed in 2011s know, you can adjust the over travel on these things. They've got the little set screw on there. So if you want less over travel, you can get it. I generally just take whatever they send it with. But shooting the trigger, what I noticed, I have size XL hands, and the trigger length of pull is a little bit long if you stay on the paddle of the safety, which you always should when you're shooting single action only guns. This isn't up for discussion, stop it. And the length of pull on the trigger when you stay on that safety is just a little bit long. I would say it's somewhere between a medium and a long on the flat face. It's not a true medium. It was easy for me to manage, but when I was used to kind of the true medium guns that I shoot kind of regularly, I did take a little bit of adjustment to get used to sort of that slightly longer length of pull. It's not a lot, but you'll notice it if you shoot a lot of 2011s. One thing I noticed is that if you look at that trigger guard profile right there, that doesn't have kind of a double undercut or a hump at the front to kind of push your hands back on the pistol, which is something I honestly prefer, but it's not something I noticed that it was missing until I sat down with a bunch of other guns. I'm like, huh, this one doesn't have the hump. Running the gun fast, it does exactly what you want to see with the 2011 platform, and it's honestly a joy to shoot. It was especially so when I shot it with my Buffalo Creek 115s. Buffalo Creek is a supporter of the channel, so thank them for that. They make really soft shooting 115 grain ammunition, really good target loads. If you want to learn more about it, there's a pinned comment. I can tell you about it on my website. The springing of the gun kind of felt appropriate. It's maybe only slightly oversprung. I don't know what the recoil spring weight is on the thing, but I don't know that if it's not an 11, I'd probably take it to an 11 and just leave it alone. Whatever came in the gun is good enough. I think it's generally going to be okay for most people. On the accessory side, because it is a 2011 platform pistol, I mean, most of the accessories are sort of already there. I tested it in 3 or 4 of my different 2011 holsters that I already had, and it fit in them just fine. If it accepts a metal grip gun, then it will probably take this one. But similarly, Kimber got Black Point Tactical engaged, and they're going to be dropping 2K11 specific holsters if you want one that's made specifically for the gun. So it's kind of cool that they're doing that little bit of homework. So probably the easiest way to show you kind of how this stacks up with kind of a build quality perspective is just to hollow out the safe and show you. And the first one that everyone is familiar with, it is probably the least expensive by half, is the Prodigy. The Prodigy is a bit of a workhorse, very basic sort of features, but is indicative, is sort of a baseline of build quality, and kind of moving up from there, just based purely on price, is a Bull Armory. This is the TAC Pro, so it's actually got the ported barrel from the factory, and it is a step up. And then another step up in price is going to be the Staccato P, And the biggest step up is the Masterpiece Arms DS9. This is the IDPA version of the gun. And before we go into fitting, let's just talk about the finish. Like, only one of these guns has anything approaching a premium sort of finish. Everything else is a Cerakote on the Prodigy, a PVD on the Bull, DLC on the Staccato, and DLC on the MPA. The Kimber is a PVD as well, but it's got kind of a brushed finish, so it's kind of got that little polish going on, so it looks higher end. Getting into the slide on frame fit, which is probably one of the less important characteristics, but there is a, you know, decent amount of wiggle on the gun at this point. It's got over, I don't know, low four figures in round count, so it's whatever loosening up it's gonna do, it is done. And it's just a little bit of rock. Whereas with the Prodigy, honestly, same thing. There is some rock, maybe a little bit more rock with the Prodigy. The Bull Armory, a little bit less rock. It's a little bit less than the other two, but not a lot. Same thing on the Staccato P. It's the same level of rock as the Bull. And even the MPA, this is probably the highest round count on the gun on the table. And it's even got a tiny little bit of rock. And the next thing that people want to check is just the slide smoothness. So how does the slide move on the rails? So with the Prodigy, it kind of is hitchy and bindy, and then it kind of hangs up right there on the disconnector. Moving up to the Bull Armory. Very smooth, just a slight hitch on the disconnector, just a tiny bit. Staccato P. Yep, same thing, just a tiny little bit of a hitch on the disconnector. The Kimber, very smooth, the smoothest so far as the slide action is concerned. And up at the MPA is a similar level of smoothness to the Kimber. I'd say they're definitely in the same ballpark. This might be slightly more smooth, but very close. So bringing it back here to talk about the small parts on the internals, because 2011 bros always ask, so might as well talk about it. Are they tool steel internals or are they MIM internals? And I can tell you that the ambi safety, the firing pin stop, and the slide stop are all MIM. Now, there's different degrees of MIM, and this is done kind of the most appropriate way, which is the MIM parts are oversized and then machines precision grind them to correct specification. And so the fit of the parts is, you know, as good as tool steel parts at that point because they are fully machined in the critical areas. But the difference is metal injection molding is about 95% as strong as a tool steel part. That's going to be most notable on the ambi safety because the little, you know, yoke that kind of meets up with the main side safety, like these legs are prone to snapping off, and that's the only part that I have broken that is MIM. And that's honestly a part that breaks even as a tool steel part. You get more time out of them potentially. And interestingly, the only slide stop that I've ever broken actually was a tool steel slide stop. I thought it was MIM because it broke, but no, it was tool steel and it had bad heat treat or whatever, and it just snapped off at the post, so that was crazy. And kind of the icing on the cake with the small parts is the fact that they are DLC coated, and DLC does increase the surface hardness of the stuff. It's a very hard wearing weapons finish. It's honestly my favorite weapons finish, so that's on all of the small parts. So now let's transition away to that to sort of the negatives, because no gun is perfect. And I really like the aesthetics of this gun. I like the slide cuts, I like the finish of the gun, I like the design choices with the grip screws matching the slide and the magwell. I think that's just really cool. I just really like this gun. It reminds me a lot of the TTI Sand Viper, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous gun in my opinion. It's one of the best looking 2011s, but it's also like all the money. Like it's 3x what this one costs. So it's cool that I can kind of scratch that itch without getting all the way up to the Sand Viper. But anyway, negatives on this gun. So as I mentioned, the trigger guard shape doesn't have a bump that kind of forces your support hand back into the gun. I really like that feature on 2011 grips. I don't miss it terribly when it's not there. And as I mentioned, I didn't even notice it wasn't there until I sat down and compared it to other guns, but I would prefer that it was there. And this next one, YouTube, I'm gonna need your patience on it. I am not increasing the capacity of the magazine, but it is possible to overstuff the 45 magazines with up to 15 rounds. The problem is that when you try to seat that magazine into the gun is the magazine is swelling, so it won't actually fit in the grip. So if you download it to 14 rounds and think you're good, it will fit in the grip, but it won't feed. It will nosedive hard on the ramp and take a, appreciable amount out of that round. They're stated as being 13 round magazines, and they will only function with 13 rounds despite the fact that they can be overstuffed. It'd be nice if there was an alternate base pad that kind of restricts you from being able to overstuff the magazines. Again, it's a small feature, but now that you know about it, you know what you're looking for. The optic plate on the SRO. You can see, as I mentioned, that the cowl of the SRO hangs forward of the breech face, which is sort of not ideal. Generally, people are concerned that you're going to catch brass. I've got, low 4 figures of rounds on this gun. It never was once an issue with catching brass. However, it does create a different issue. The lens doesn't get smoked. It's beautiful because usually when you shoot an optic on a gun, some smoke comes out from the chamber and gets on the glass of the optic. That doesn't happen at all because the cowl is taking all of the blast on the bottom side of the optic. So the gas is kind of going around the lens, which is nice. But when you clean the gun and then shoot it, what happens is oil comes off the action and gets on the glass. It's a different issue to manage, and after a magazine or so, that issue goes away, but at the same time, it probably would be better if the optics set further back on the slide. As I mentioned, the trigger profile is a little bit long, so our short king friends are probably going to have a harder time getting onto the trigger and having good control of it. That's an easy swap to make if you decide you don't like the trigger profile, but there you go. And finally, the internal geometry of the grip is such that you can't insert a magazine if it's rotated past about 10 degrees, it will bind in the grip. That's a steel magazine on an aluminum grip. It's a very common phenomenon. You can see that my Phoenix Trinity Hero grip on my XC also does the same thing, but you can see in the Masterpiece gun you can have it turned up to about 30 degrees and the internal geometry of the grip will actually correct the orientation of the mag and allow you to seat it. It's really cool. None of those negatives are necessarily deal breakers in my mind, but just stuff you could probably be aware of. So ultimately, I'm pretty positive on the 2K11, largely due to the fact that like all the 2011s you buy all look the same, like they're all black. And finally to have, not only a pop of color, but an actual like premium finish of having this little bit of polish, some interesting slide cut geometry going on is very welcome in the space in my eyes. And not just to do the same thing everyone else is doing, but throwing in an external extractor, a new design on a toolless guide rod, and trying to solve the over insertion problem with 2011 mags in a new sort of way is kind of cool. So this is not honestly something I would have expected out of Kimber a year or more ago. I generally think that they kind of stay sort of straight down the middle of what was acceptable. They're just living in 1911 land. But recently, with their double stack guns coming out and kind of coming to a head with this double stack gun, and it not only being a good double stacked gun in its own right, but looking for kind of those features that enhance the platform is really cool. So I'm excited that Kimber is joining the conversation on the 2011 style pistol because honestly, it's my favorite platform. They're just really great shooters, pretty easy to maintain and work on. So it's very nice to see that Kimber didn't just lay up when they tried to enter the field. So if you just watched this video and you want to see how it kind of compares to sort of the low end and the high end, I've got these videos here. One is for the Prodigy, which is about the least amount of money you can spend, and the Masterpiece Arms DS9, which is about a 40% premium over the Kimber.